and the red light is on. No apologies have been received. And there's no indication of anybody wanting to delegate authority later on? No. Okay. Declaration of interest. Anybody interest to declare? And bearing in mind you may declare an interest as we go through if anything comes up. Okay, thank you. Moving on to chairperson's business, unpaid commercial rent. As members are aware, the committee has passed a number of statutory rules which have delayed forfeitures associated with unpaid business rents. This is part of the package of COVID business support measures. As members are also aware, our government has also announced major plans for primary legislation for England at Westminster, which will act to both ring-fence outstanding unpaid rent built up during the pandemic, as well as providing for the imposition of a compulsory and binding statutory arbitration process for rental disputes. In AQWs, the Minister has advised that his officials have been working with Westminster counterparts to insert an enabling power in the new Westminster Bill. This power would allow the Department to replicate that policy if required in a local context by making subordinate legislation in the Assembly should mandatory arbitration be considered to be an appropriate method for addressing the issue of unpaid commercial rent when the business moratorium ends, we suspect in March 2022. Is the committee content to write to the Department seeking clarification as to the Department's policy position on unpaid business rents and mandatory arbitration to determine whether a legislative consent motion is to be brought forward? Are we agreed? Agreed. And the draft minutes of the Finance Committee meeting on the 10th of November are at page 7. Are members content that the draft minutes are an accurate record of proceedings? Is this agreed? Agreed. Yep. Thank you. There are no matters arising. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, item number 6, Financial Reporting, Departments and Public Bodies Bill, Committee Stage Committee Report. The committee will now consider the draft report on the committee stage of the Financial Reporting, Departments and Public Bodies Bill. The following papers are relevant to this agenda item. The draft report on the committee stage of the Financial Reporting, Department and Public Bodies Bill 21/1722 at page 22. Okay. The following written and departmental oral briefings on possible amendments to the bill. Following the following written and departmental oral briefings on departmental amendments on the bill, the committee elected to not amend the bill but to seek and accept ministerial assurances. The committee has also agreed to support a departmental amendment relating to the treatment of NIPSO. Okay. Members, any comments on the draft report? May I make a comment, Peter? Thank you very much indeed to you and the team for producing the draft report in such a timely manner and for the work that you and all the team have put in. And I think, may I put on record our committee's thanks to you for that.
Thanks, Chairperson.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, the reason I was delayed is a leading journalist in the country rang me to tell me the Finance Committee thought was the most effective and best run committee in the Assembly, which I thought was suitable praise, and obviously the clerk and yourself must take some of the credit for that. So I would endorse that was turned around remarkably quickly. Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, I would second or third that.
Oh, thank you very much.
I'd like to know who this leading journalist was, but perhaps it's considered off the record. And
I'll tell you later. Very well known journalist.
Right. I'd like to now comment on as we go through. If members are content, are members content with the introduction at page 27 and 29? Is this agreed? You need to say it.
Agreed.
Agreed. Yep. Okay. Are members content with the committee approach and acknowledgement of page 29 to 30? Is this agreed? Agreed. Agreed. Are members content with the committee declarations sections at page 31 to 38? Is this agreed? Agreed. Agreed. Are members content with the clause by clause scrutiny section at pages 38 to 39? Is this agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. Are members content with the list of appendices at pages 40 to 41? Is this agreed? Agreed. Are members content with the executive summary at page 26? Is this agreed? Agreed. Agreed. Are members content to order the report to be published as the fourth report of the Committee for Finance? Agreed. Is agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much indeed. Moving on to the next item on the agenda, the spending review. And can I add Rachel and Chris to the spotlight, please? There we go. There we go. Don't answer. So, the committee will now receive an oral briefing from Assembly Research on the spending review. Hi Rachel, hi Chris, can you hear me okay?
Hello, yes, I can hear you.
Great.
Yes, sure.
And the Assembly Research paper is at page 45. Who's going to speak, Rachel or Chris?
I'll go first.
Okay, away you go, Rachel.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon. The purpose of the briefing paper is to identify, from a Northern Ireland perspective, key points arising from the Chancellor's spending review and autumn budget, which was announced on October 27th. Throughout the paper, we've identified a series of potential issues for consideration. These can be found in highlighted blue boxes. The purpose of these is simply to support the committee's deliberations in these areas. As you know, the spending review this year covers the 3-year period from 2022 until 2025. This departs from the past 2 spending reviews, so last year and then the year before, which have covered only 1 year. This multi-year spending review and subsequent UK budget therefore allows the Executive to set a multi-year budget this year. Information announced during the spending review and UK budget informs the content of the upcoming Executive budget, including, for example, the overall quantum of funding available, any UK-wide policies in which Northern Ireland benefits from, and also UK policies which do not cover Northern Ireland but will lead to additional funding for Northern Ireland through Barnett consequentials. Just for a refresher, public spending is divided into 2 main categories. That's departmental expenditure limits, commonly referred to as DEL, and also annually managed expenditure, commonly referred to as AME. The spending review generally focuses on DEL spending, that is, spending over which departments have control of and for which they can plan. AME, on the other hand, is more volatile and cannot be planned for with much certainty. An example of AME would be social welfare payments. From a Northern Ireland perspective, AME typically is not of concern because the Executive does not have discretion over it. However, AME potentially does become of concern if the Executive departs from UK-wide measures which are funded through AME, such as enhancing the social welfare payment provision. Then, under the rules, the Executive is required to fund that top-up using DEL, which then has an impact on Northern Ireland's block grant. Throughout the paper, we refer to the Northern Ireland block grant. This is simply comprised of baseline funding, which is announced during spending review, in addition to top-ups which are made throughout the financial year. The top-ups can be Barnett or non-Barnett. The Barnett formula is typically used during UK fiscal events to allocate additional funding to the devolved administrations. However, during the COVID-19 pandemic, Treasury for the first time announced a series of Barnett funding guarantees throughout the year. Examples of non-Barnett funding include agreements which Northern Ireland has negotiated, for example, the New Decade New Approach funding or confidence and supply funding. Table 1 in section 1.1 of the paper provides an illustration of the Northern Ireland block grant and how it has evolved over the course of the current financial year. This is a really useful table for comparison when considering funding announcements made during the most recent spending review, which Chris is going to discuss. So I'm going to pass over to Chris, who will walk through the funding that will be made available to Northern Ireland over the coming years in terms of the baseline as well as top-ups, which have already been announced. These include both new and existing funding packages. But first of all, he's going to walk through the current economic context, focusing on Northern Ireland.
Okay, so thank you, Rachel. So, Jerry, yes, before I talk about some of the key points from the budget and spending review, I'll just go over some of the recent economic context in which the budget was formed. So both the UK and Northern Ireland economies have now returned to growth, and they've both been up and down over the past year as restrictions have come and gone, been introduced and eased again. But both economies are on the right track again, and are both still just below where they were pre-pandemic. So the UK economy in terms of economic output just 0.6% below where it was in February 2020, which was the sort of peak of the economy before the pandemic struck. The picture is much the same in Northern Ireland. We had a dip in economic output in early 2021 as we got a new lockdown starting on Boxing Day, And then we've seen the economy recover as that lockdown was eased, and the vaccine rollouts continue to build to gather pace. So Northern Ireland's economy, like the UK, is slightly below its peak from before the pandemic, but we should see that return. We should see ourselves surpassing that peak fairly soon, within the next month or in the next quarter. So you can see that in Figure 1 and Figure 2 of our paper. In terms of outlook for the economy, the average independent forecast for 2021 taken by the Bank of England is for about 7% for 2021, which has been revised up from previous months, just given the strength of recent data publications. The OBR thinks it's about 6.5% for 2021. Northern Ireland usually would track what the UK is doing, so if it's growing or contracting, Northern Ireland will be doing the same, but just to a lesser extent. So that's the case here. We see 7% for the UK, and Danske Bank, in conjunction with Oxford Economics, think about 5.8% for Northern Ireland for 2021. There's some key issues that very much have influence in the economy at the moment, and probably will inform the formulation of any executive budgets that we see this year. And those are things like supply chain problems, labour shortages, where firms are having difficulty recruiting staff and having to pay more to get the staff that they need. What we see a lot of discussion about at the minute is inflation and the cost of living. So inflation's on the rise now. You'll see it this morning. It's now double what the Bank of England's target is. And rising energy prices play a large part of that. And then, as I think we mentioned in the presentation we gave to you in June about the executive budget, we've still got our long-standing economic issues in Northern Ireland, such as high inactivity and boosting productivity growth, and we still need to tackle. So, in terms of the key features of this budget and spending review, we'll talk briefly about the funding allocated in 4 main groups. So that will be the core general block grant funding, the Treasury allocates to Northern Ireland, additional block grant funding, some other existing funding programmes such as NDNA, City Deals and Fresh Start Agreement, and then other funding such as the Levelling Up Fund and the Shared Prosperity Fund. So if we start with the core block grant funding, so this is bonded allocated, and this is the funding that we receive for our resource and capital budgets, and we're free to allocate however we see fit for business as usual services. So on table 1 of the paper, you'll see the core amounts that have been allocated in this budget for the 3-year period. So we'll see totals of 14.9, 15.1, and 15.3 billion, most of which is non-ring-fenced resource DEL, and that's the largest component. And according to Treasury, the average increase per year is 1.6 billion for each of the 3 years of the spending review period. Again, most of that is resource DEL. That's about 1.4 billion of that 1.6. We'll come back to that later on. In terms of additional block funding, for the 3-year period of the spending review, we've got just under £1 billion pounds in terms of support for farmers, land managers and fisheries, and around 15 million for a TPP programme, so that's tackling paramilitarism programme. So those 3 things would be non-Barnett allocated, but form part of our overall allocation from Treasury in the spending review. In terms of the third category I mentioned, so that's existing funding programmes. So these are again non-Barnett allocated. So these include funding for things like a Fresh Start Agreement, New Decade Approach, City Deals, and these are a mixture of capital and resource allocation. So collectively, that's worth 215 200 and 133 million in each of the 3 years respectively, covering this budget period. And then in terms of other funding, we'll touch on this as well. So we've got funding allocated from the Levelling Up Fund. So that will be mostly intended for things like infrastructure projects and high street regeneration and those sorts of projects. And the Shared Prosperity Fund. Again, there's still relatively limited detail on this. And I think that's something we mentioned previously when we talked about the executive budget to the committee, that there wasn't too much detail on that. And it's still, I think, ongoing discussions on what involvement the executive might have in administering and allocating that funding. In terms of then non-block funding, so this includes things like the health and social care levy to tackle some of the health services longer term challenges. So you'll see scrutiny point 6 in the paper, which is in section 4, and that basically talks about this social care, health and social care levy. So it's, as far as we're aware, the quantum of that levy has already been included in the resource allocations from Treasury. So I think it would be, the committee may wish to seek further clarification on what form that allocation might take. It's not clear if that will be from a Barnett consequential or if it'll be ring-fenced for health and social care, or it'll simply be a topping up of the overall allocation available to the executive. So aside from those key points arising from the budget and the spending review, we also included a brief analysis in the paper on the different interpretations of the scale of additional funding available to the executive over the budget period. So you'll be aware that there were 2 different interpretations of that scale of funding difference between Treasury and between the department, and there are 2 main reasons for that, really. So the first of which is that the baseline figure for 2021-22, which the subsequent years are compared to, is different. So Treasury uses a lower one, and the department uses a higher one, essentially. So that's in figure 5 of the paper, and that shows that difference. So it's important to note that the amount of funding allocated for each of the 3 years isn't disputed. It's the baseline figure with which they're being compared is different. So the second reason for that difference in interpretation is that the figures quoted aren't actually directly comparable. So Treasury was talking about the overall resource and capital down allocation and its difference relative to the baseline, whereas the department was talking about resource down only, which also influenced some of that difference. It may be something that the committee wishes to look into, or be worth finding out why that happened, because it doesn't appear that that's an issue that happened with other devolved administrations. And then, just to conclude what I've covered there, we've got a budget then that's been formed in an economic environment that does seem to be improving, both at the UK and Northern Ireland level. Although a lot of our long-running issues in economic terms still remain. And there are other pressing issues such as cost of living, energy costs, labour supply, and supply chain shortages that we've got to deal with. But overall, the outlook looks more positive in the short and medium term. The budget does represent an increase, although the amount by which it increases is varied depending on which baseline figure you refer to. And then we've got a first multi-year budget we've had in quite a while, and the hope is obviously then that improves department's abilities to plan and deliver on strategies relative to previous budgets we've had, which only covered single years. So thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions on any of that, then Rachel or I are happy to take those.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. Sir Chris, Rachel, Your paper refers to the Health and Social Care Levy, which is an increase in national insurance contributions, which will take from 2022. We've been told that the associated Northern Ireland allocation would be 300 million per annum for the period of the spending review. Is there indication that the money is not included in the figures that were shared by the Minister recently, or have those already been factored in?
It's our understanding that the quantum or the amount of the levy or whatever is generated, and that's been included in the resource allocation. So, yeah, so that was our understanding. In I suppose in the past week in preparing this briefing, was that it's already been included in the resource allocations. It's maybe what we're not clear on is what form that allocation will take, which is the point that scrutiny point 6 makes in the paper, is how it actually will be allocated.
Okay, thanks. Matthew, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you both for a really, as always, really thorough but concise presentation. Can I just ask for a bit more detail on this dispute about what the baseline is? What is in the DOF baseline that's not in the Treasury baseline?
In terms of what it includes and what it doesn't include, there is a reference to it in here, if you would bear with me. Sorry, Chair. But I think the essential, the crux of it is that the actual amount of funding for 2022-23 up to 24-25 is the same. It's just the difference in how Treasury and how the Department have treated that 2021-22 figure. I'm not entirely sure, to be honest, what's caused that. It doesn't appear that it's happened with other devolved administrations.
Sorry, did you say it has happened? Sorry,
I'm not actually sure where that difference came from.
Did you say it has happened with other devolved administrations or hasn't?
No, not that we're aware of. It hasn't been an issue. No, it doesn't appear.
So it's not things like, I mean, you would imagine it would be, like we've got so many weird little pots that Fresh Start and Conference and Supply. It's not that.
Not as far as we're aware, but it would be something worth checking or inquiring with the department as to where that change came from.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay. Keith, sorry.
Yeah, just one wee question. See the FTC. I'm looking at table 2. Chris and Rachel. I presume that's the financial transition and capital, where that's showing us 162 in 2023. 22-23, then dropping to 66 and 62. What's the reason for that? Is that because of not uptake on it, or do we know what the reason that has dropped significantly in those previous, the last 2 years of the 3 years?
I'm not actually sure whether it's. I'm not actually sure what the reason is for that profile is, or why it drops off. I wouldn't be able to say for sure if it's just that there's not any uptake, or whether it'll be reprofiled, or what the case may be. To be honest, I don't think it's to do with a lack of uptake, because it goes as far as 3 years into the future. So again, that would be something that would be worth checking with the officials from the department.
No, fair enough. I think we can ask that question, because I think the Minister was in the chamber a few weeks ago. We remember the FTC was low in uptake.
Yeah, there was, because we weren't being able to spend it.
And then next year it's the 160, and it's just West dropped off. It's not a direct question, but we can find that out. Yeah. No, that's fine. Thank you, Chair.
If you're happy, Vice Chair and the committee will write directly to the department asking for that sort of detail about the FTC, how it was.
And we update on Chair. We update on this year. Or where he thinks it's going to go.
Where we are in FTC, because remember through the rest of the committee, we raised the issue with the Minister on several occasions, and he indicated there was a bit of a reluctance from other departments to sort of take up the FTC. And I think we raised the issue particularly about sort of infrastructure when it was coming to roads and various other things, but we understood there was how the sort of partnership issue needed to work with FTC. But okay, we'll do that as well. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Keith.
It's me, thanks.
Any others? Okay, team, thanks very much indeed. Rachel, Chris, thank you very much indeed for that. Again, another excellent briefing, and thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.
Tim, just before we go on to the next item of the agenda, I've just been informed that the Minister will not be available to come to us today. At the end, I'll look at the forward work programme. We'll think about the date in December where it would be available to do it after the budget. We've had the budget, so we'll do that as well. I'm disappointed the Minister isn't here, but the other issue is we had several officials who were on standby to come in and help brief us as well. But we've heard from officials, and I think it's particularly wanted to hear from the Minister, so I don't want the officials hanging around. Could we ask, thank the officials for their attendance, but look, just pass on our apologies and just say that's if we are content. Are we content, committee?
Yep.
Content. Thank you very much indeed. Moving on to the next item of agenda, item number 8, subordinate legislation. Statute Rule 297, female genital mutilation protection orders. Peter, could you just explain why this is in front of our committee? Because I think it's a very important piece of legislation, and I understand it, but I just wanted for the committee to understand why this is an issue that's come before us.
I think, Chairperson, it's a civil law issue. That's what we get, so that's why we get things like divorce and the civil registration stuff, which is coming on later. So I think for whatever reason that is a civil law matter, and so it comes to us. You might have thought it would sit more readily with either health or justice, but no, civil law is with us apparently, with finance.
Okay. And sorry, I need to make a declaration of interest here. I am a member of the board of Christian Aid Ireland, and obviously we're campaigning very heavily to sort of stamp out this these repulsive acts. And therefore, if I was obviously that might colour my particular judgment on this issue that's coming forward. But I think if there's anybody's any objections to me chairing this particular, please say. Thank you.
Definitely not.
Thank you, members.
I think you'll find, Mr. Chairman, that the committee's entirely behind you on this one.
Thank you. Therefore, members, we're asked to consider the Clerk's note at page 68 and Statutory Rule 297, Female Genital Mutilation Protection Order, relevant third-party order in Northern Ireland 2021 at page 69. The rule is subject to negative resolution and will come into operation on the 1st of December 2021. It will allow Health and Social Care Trusts to apply for a Female Genital Mutilation Protection Order, FGM Protection Order, without requiring leave of the court. The committee considered the related SL1 at the meeting on the 22nd of December 21 and had no objection to the policy proposal. The Department have advised that the rule does not deviate from that original proposal. Members, have we any comments?
Strongly in support, Mr. Chairman. Strongly in support.
Thank you. And we note that the committee strongly supports. If the members are therefore content, the Committee for Finance has considered Statutory Rule 297, Female Genital Mutilation Protection Order, relevant third-party order Northern Ireland 2021, and subject to the report of the examiner of statutory rule, has no objections to this rule. Are we agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Next item on the agenda, item number 9, subordinate legislation, civil registrations. Members are asked to consider the Clerk's note at page 76 and the SL1 Civil Registrations Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2022 at page 77. The purpose of this statutory rule is to introduce changes to civil registration legislation to enable registrations and subsequent life event certificates to be produced with the choice of certificate headings in English, Irish or bilingual English-Irish, with all content remaining in English. The option would apply from the 1st of March 2022 for all new certificates and will not be applicable to previous certificates. The proposed rule would be subject to negative resolution. Members, have we any comments?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think this is a total waste of time and money. There's no one in Northern Ireland who's registering who doesn't understand English if they're born in Northern Ireland. I can understand, for instance, a Polish person or Lithuanian requiring dual language, but not somebody born and bred in Northern Ireland, where, of course, the main language is English. I think this is just a gesture to those who would like to try and use the Irish language as a political weapon. And therefore I just want to register my opposition to it. No need for it whatsoever. It's simply done as a gesture. It's not being done for any practical purposes. And there will be a cost involved, because I have no doubt that some highly paid Irish language experts are going to have to be drafted in to carry out this work. So I'm opposed to it entirely.
Okay, any other comments?
If I may, Chair, I would just point out the irony of someone talking about the Irish language being used as a political weapon after the statement we've just heard from Mr. Wells. this is a modest proposal, to say the least, which does not go anywhere near the language provisions that were signed up to in New Decade, New Approach. It is welcome insofar as it goes. It doesn't mandate, as this note makes clear, it doesn't enable birth registrations or other certificates to be either all as Gaeilge in Irish or all it simply, or even all bilingual. It simply allows for the headings to be either bilingual or in Irish alone. That, I'm afraid, is it's a small, modest step forward, but nowhere near far enough for the Irish language community, who have had to deal with preposterous attitudes and obstacles to simple, straightforward legal recognition, as outlined by Mr. Wells. So, insofar as this modest measure goes, we welcome it, but I'm afraid it's another example of the crawl pace that people who simply want the Irish language to be recognised have to go at.
Okay, thanks. Alicia?
Yes, Chair, just while also just to clarify, Reverend and Irish Foster, I'd just like to welcome this subject as well too in relation to the Irish language. And I get tired when I hear people talk about it being used as a weapon, given that from the very fact that right down through the centuries every effort has been made by British authorities in particular to suppress the language. And in breaking the language, they knew that they possibly might have been ending up breaking the spirit of people as well too. But thankfully, they haven't been successful in that regard. That even to this day now, so many of our people here in the north of Ireland, not only do they speak Irish, but that they raise their family with Irish as their first language. And they're quite entitled to Irish people living in Ireland, speaking their own language, to have that opportunity of registering and giving recognition to their children in terms of registering them through the medium of Irish as well too. I welcome this legislation, and hopefully it'll pass through Parliament in a way that whereby people with common sense and understanding will totally appreciate and understand the significance and the importance of this legislation as well too. Thank you.
Philip?
Yeah, good. As without intending to embarrass my 4 children, I'm speaking as a father of 4 children who were educated through the medium of Irish. 2 of them are now Irish teachers in Bun schools, where the education of all the children there are taught through Irish. I certainly welcome this development, and it kind of reminded me of the time over 20 years ago when I did go to register one of my children, and when I gave their names as they are in Irish, I was asked about strokes in relation to fadas. So, I mean, no longer do we need to talk about strokes. No longer do people need to feel embarrassed about having their names in Irish and registering their children with Irish names. I think that I accept that the pace of change is slow, but this is a welcome step forward, and I think it should be welcomed by us all.
Okay. Anybody else have any more to say? Sorry, Jim.
Yeah, it can be packaged and presented very plausibly, but where this sort of thing has a real impact is in the employment situation, where the authorities required to receive and to facilitate such of necessity then have to present staff capable of doing that. And that means, therefore, that when it comes to the recruitment of staff, those with that facility in Irish have the advantage. And of course that is, to my mind, much of the what lies behind much of the agitation pertaining to Irish language. It's not that there are people who don't understand English. There are people who wish to radicalise the public service to the advantage, employment-wise, of those who can speak Irish, and therefore to the resulting disadvantage of those who can't. And that's why it's an assault that some of us seek to resist.
Thank you. Just for a comment, right? Do we know why they're not Ulster Scots not included in it as well?
Doesn't indicate but the correspondence refers to this being an NDNA stipulation, NDNA agreement. That's what it says.
It must have been in the bit they inserted when I was still reading it when they announced it was happening. Right.
Were you sleeping at the wheel?
I wasn't. I was actually physically sitting in Stormont House reading it while the Secretary of State and my friend Simon Coveney were busy telling everybody what was in it. I never even got a chance to read the thing before it happened. But there we go. Just goes to show. That's why we never signed up to NDNA. Do we want to put this to a vote, team? Jim? Up to you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Therefore, we shall put statutory Committee for Finance statutory laws, civil registrations amendment regulations law in 2021 or 22. Sorry, put it to the vote. All those in favour?
Right, Chair. Beg your pardon, Chair. The motion is, just so members are clear, that the committee has considered SL1 Civil Registration Amendment Regulations Northern Ireland 2022. It's only the SL1, and there's no objection to the policy intent, and is content for the department to make the rule. Sorry, Chair.
Okay. All those in favour, raise their hands.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Yep. All those against, raise their hands.
1, 2, 3. That's 3. Hold on, I can't count. That
No,
was
that can't
6.
be right.
I beg your pardon, members. That was 6. 6 ayes. I do beg your pardon. But the motion is carried.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed. The motion is carried. Okay. Next item, moving on to correspondence. Correspondence index, page 10. Members note that index has received 10 items of correspondence. The first one is marriage law consultation. Members asked to note at page 83, departmental notice of a consultation notification on marriage law in respect of adding belief marriage to legislation, i.e. marriage undertaken by a celebrant of a non-religious nature. And the second one, determining views in relation to allowing under 18s to marry or undertake civil partnerships. Under 18s may currently do so, but may require parental consent. Any members wish to comment?
I would simply comment on the in terms of the issue around humanism, I know lots of people. This is an issue that's important to quite a lot of people who aren't religious, and this was one of the last parts of these islands in which it was not possible to have a humanist celebration. If this now that has been amended and it's possible to do that now in Northern Ireland, consistent with I know in Scotland and the Republic you can do it. This seems to be correcting a lacuna around which has been created by that. That's a welcome thing, but it would just be helpful to understand. And I'm sure it's in the consultation. It would be helpful to understand whether it creates any new inequalities with those who if you see what I mean, who are pursuing the kind of humanist or the non-religious route. The clerk's looking at me like
It's about addressing that.
Yes. So I'm.
That's what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
That they're allowed to do it.
No, indeed, but. Okay, but perhaps we should move on.
Please
I suggest we
explain.
move on, Claire, because I'm Chair, because I think we're taking. I don't want to take the committee down a rabbit hole. I was making a point rather than.
So are we content to note?
Content to note. I am.
Agreed. Okay. Next item on the agenda is Clawback Strool campus. Members asked to note at page 125 a departmental response to a committee query regarding clawback provisions where a new school is provided. The query arose in respect to the Strool campus. The department indicates that 100% of the market value of the vacated school is clawed back, but that the market value is only assessed within 6 months of vacation of the school. Any members wish to comment?
Just want to welcome that clarification. I think I asked for it.
One of the questions I probably have, and it's been raised by this, the fact that it's 100% of the market value of the school, but I think some of us are aware that some schools are not, the land that they're owned on is not necessarily owned by the Department of Education or by whatever whatever sort of particular sort of religious orders and the rest of it. It just seems quite strange that everything in OMA is capable of 100% clawback.
But is it not clawback from whoever owns it?
Yeah, that's what and that's what, but I sort of, again, declaration of interest. There's a school that I'm involved in my constituency, where there is a school premises and land that's owned by a church that has been gifted over. But again, it's a question of what the value of the land, and where does it sit. It just seems that it's a very definitive 100% of market value is coming from. Are we content to note, or do you want to ask any other questions?
Content to note, Chair.
Okay, that's your neck of the woods, Militia. Are you happy enough?
Yeah, I'm happy enough.
Okay. Next item is active travel. Members asked to note at page 126 correspondence from the Committee for Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs to the Minister regarding active travel programmes. As the committee content to note? Agreed. Procedures, private members bill. Members asked to consider at page 127 correspondence from the Committee on Procedures seeking the committee's views on private member bill sponsors joining scrutiny committees during the passage of their bills. The committee had suggested that standing orders be amended in order to allow for this, so as to save time during the scrutiny of a private member's bill. Members, have we any comments? Okay, are we happy? Sorry.
I would have to welcome this because of the limited time we have. We've got something like 28 7 days. There may well be some that's added, and anything that progresses the bills through the committee stage should be welcome. We should be doing everything we possibly can to get a lot of those private member bills through and onto the legislative books.
Allow me to make another declaration of interest. I'm doing this a lot today. I'm a member of obviously the Chairperson's Liaisons Group. This was discussed this week, and the indication was that the direction of travel would be that there would be no ex officio membership of a committee for somebody who is doing a private member's bill. However, they would be allowed to attend but not ask questions.
Yeah.
So that's not substantially different from the way it is now, is it?
Well, Chair, I must say that's rather makes the committee that I'm next attending this afternoon to give evidence to, the Procedures Committee, irrelevant in that they're allegedly considering this very proposition. If you're telling us that the Chairman of the Liaisons Committee has already decided otherwise, then why is the Procedures Committee wasting everyone's time?
I think it's
an investigation into this.
I think it's the paper that we're forwarding. We've been asked for our opinion on it.
All right.
So I'm not quite sure of the sequencing of this, and I would apologise to the committee just in case I've got the sequencing of this wrong. But I think that was where we were. That's where we were at on Tuesday.
Well, I must say, Chair, as someone who's steered two private members' bills through the House, one where I was on the scrutiny committee and the other where I wasn't, the experience from the perception of the sponsor is that it's very much desirable to be on the scrutiny committee. Mm-hmm. Now, the perception of the sponsor isn't the be-all and end-all, but certainly it enabled a sponsor to address immediately issues and to offer how they would deal with them. I think prevented the committee going down rabbit holes, chasing issues which the sponsor could deal with, and it also gave an insight for the sponsor into the evidence being presented and an opportunity to question the witnesses. I thought it was much preferable to be on the committee than not to be, and I thought that's something that any mover of private members' bill could very much benefit from.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Jim has just covered the point. Obviously, in paragraph 3, it's asking for our views, and I presume that's probably referring to Jim in this committee that has put a bill. Because on a previous committee we were on this morning, as Jim refers to, a question can come up on a bill, and if the sponsor's there, they can
answer it straight away.
Nip it, excuse the term, straight away, and answer it or nip it in the bud.
Yeah.
That's a whole, so it would be advantageous, but I presume we're responding back to Emer Boyle with that comment, Representative? Yeah.
Yep. And because it is to the Committee for Procedures, we're reporting back. Okay, that's it. Pat and then Matthew.
Yeah, well, it's just to say that at the time of your private members bill coming through, Mr. Alistair, you were on this committee, And I find that very helpful, okay, because we could get the answers there and then. I think this is what they're trying to do. And take in mind that the amount of work which is coming through and going to go through the committees, we should be doing everything we possibly can in order to speed that through and show in the short life that we've had after the 3 years of doing nothing and the 2 years that we're up for it and able to do the work. And it would be a real positive outcome of able to deliver as many of those private member bills as possible, taking in mind that Gemma is also just introduced her private members bill there this week. So anything that speeds it up, I would be welcoming.
Okay, thanks. Matthew?
I think the key point I would make is that I think it's obvious that in certain circumstances having the bill sponsor in the room to answer questions speedily is an advantage. I mean, it's also worth saying, and this isn't a specific comment on Jim or his bill, or indeed the other bill that Keith and I are dealing with in another committee where the bill sponsor happens to be a member of the committee. There are obviously dynamics inside committees where if you're wearing two hats, that it's not necessarily a conflict. It can be complementary, but I think the key thing is codification. I think it's my view, and this is my view, is that there are clear benefits to it, but there are also issues and that it could do with being clarified by the. I mean, if it's going to be discussed by the Procedures Committee, that might be where it happens. But I think having rules of the road, which cover committee members who happen to be on the committee where the PMB is going through, is important. Actually, I also think it's important to have a degree of equality for people like, for the sake of argument, Mike Nesbitt, who's taking through a bill which we're scrutinising but isn't on this committee, or Pat, I presume, is not on the Health Committee, who I think it's Health or Education, or we're scrutinising his bill. Education. So I think the key thing is that there are clear and consistent rules, is the point I would make, and those rules should cover eventually, because there will be, I mean, for example, when you're doing scrutiny, is there a burden on the chair to prioritise other members who are questioning people who are giving evidence? Mm-hmm. Should the bill sponsor hold back? And do you see what I mean? I think there are there are good aspects to it, but I think it needs to be considered in the round, and a set of rules of the road agreed.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we've had the very practical experience with Jim's bill, and Gemma's bill will give us another example. I tell you how strongly I feel about that. Even if Mr. McHugh was bringing forward a private member's bill, which I am sure I will disagree with everything from the short title down to the bit at the end about when Her Majesty is going to sign it, I would still welcome his presence in the committee to cut off problems at the pass, as it were. Now, Mr. Toole here suggested that there are downsides. I cannot see where the downsides are. The only downside would perhaps be that the chair would feel under some obligation to be more favourable towards the bill because it was a committee member. Well, it's pretty clear that totally neutral, Mr. Chair, when it came to Mr. Alistair's bill. Equally, I didn't detect any reticence amongst those who opposed Mr. Alistair's bill, that they weren't shy and hiding behind the bush in opposing it at the committee. They opposed its actual existence. They actually opposed the paper that it was printed on and the ink that was spent to print the bill. And I didn't walk out of the room saying, I don't know where Mr. McGuigan stands on Mr. Alistair's bill. I caught the nuances of what he's trying to say, that the bill should be burned at the stake. So therefore, on that basis, we've been through a controversial bill. I'm sure the next one won't be as controversial. And I just cannot see the downside of this proposal. And we are, as Pat has said, we are facing a monumental task in getting all these bills through between now and the election. I note the press, mind you, are not heralding the fact that we're doing so much. It's just interesting that when there are very few bills going through this House, the press were lambasting us as being lazy, and now when there's a massive amount of legislation going through, there's silence. But if we're going to be able to get this all done, all the committees, not just ourselves, but the advantage of having, I don't know whether you make him a member, but whether you give him the same rights as a member, only of course on the section that's dealing with his or her bill. Mm-hmm. The benefits are so enormous that I think we need to dig our heels in on this one, because we have benefited enormously from it, by chance, certainly by chance. And no doubt the honourable member for Balik, when it comes to her bill, will be here, give us the benefit of visiting us now and then, and she will be leaving her palatial mansion in West Fermanagh, coming up and giving us evidence on it, and we will benefit from it. And even though I might disagree with some of what she said, I think we will benefit enormously. This is a chance to start to get things right in this building, and I think we don't take no for an answer on this one.
Okay, Matthew?
The point I would make is not necessarily, but it's to be clear about what we're talking about. If we mean that the bill sponsor being on hand in the room based on a set of agreed principles to answer specific questions, that's one thing, and I think that is, there definitely are clear and demonstrable benefits to that. The point I was simply making is that there are unresolved questions around how it works when the bill sponsor is a full member of the committee and has full voting rights when it comes to, for example, who we take evidence for, not we or another committee takes evidence from. So I think those things need to be considered and thought through. So do you see what I mean? That's the happenstance.
Yeah, because the thing, well, sort of as I envisaged it, and this is the way I thought it worked very well when we had Jim's bill coming through, that he was able to, not necessarily steer it, but we could ask questions directly of Jim of some of the particular points he was there, and that gave that. But he was also able to ask questions at particular periods of time that enabled us to get to sort of examine the evidence in more detail. The issue, I think, and this is the bit and this is the difference between, you have somebody as an ex officio member, what degree of influence do they have? Do they have questioning rights within the committee, which I think is perfectly valid, but do they have additional rights, as in to ask for witness lists or the rest of it if that's set within the committee? I think they can write to the committee and say, these are the kind of people I think should be coming as part of the witness list, or this is where it should be going, or it should be going through the clerk, which can be considered by the committee. I think there's degrees of membership of the committee. I think that's the important piece. I think nobody disagrees with the fact that it would be very useful to have the person who's the bill sponsor, who's sitting in the committee, who can ask questions as we go through. But whether they should be in a position, as you pointed out, Matthew, where they're in a position to influence, apart from writing to the committee and saying, I suggest these following people that might be useful for your evidence base. Does that encapsulate, I think, committee where we are? Sorry, I'm just looking at the nods. Sorry, Keith, go ahead.
Just one more question. So is the question that if an individual has a bill in another committee, they go into that committee for that additional period of time to be an additional committee they're on? So let's say Pat, if you don't mind me using you as an example, if Pat goes on to, would Pat need to theoretically go on to the health committee? Yeah?
No, only when they're considering only when that bill is under consideration of that period of time.
So that could be how long? A few months, obviously.
Well, it's on the education, and it's 8 weeks. I think, so hopefully it'll be quicker than that.
So how do if you've got 9 in the committee, and Pat, for example, and Pat, not mind using his name in vain, goes on, who goes off?
No, that would
be an ex officio member.
It'd be an addition.
Fair enough.
And Chair, remember to keep me right. It wouldn't be that Pat would be joining the Education Committee. He wouldn't have a vote. He would just be there.
Yeah.
When witnesses were there, he could question the witnesses, make suggestions to the committee about other witnesses and all that good stuff, but he wouldn't have a vote. It wouldn't be like that.
So only there at the time whenever there's relevant stuff to the bill.
And only there for the purpose of maintaining the sort of integrity of the bill scrutiny process, but he wouldn't have a vote on that bill within that committee if he wasn't a member of that.
Hold on effectively for that period of time.
Yeah.
And that the Chair, again, keep me right, and that the invitation of the committee, so that they could say, thanks very much, Pat, we don't need you today, if they were going to deliberate in private, let's say. Yeah,
well, that would have to be, because the committee membership and the rules and regulations of the committee remain extant.
I think that is a point. Like, this isn't, but any private members bill, I think it would be worth the Procedures Committee investigating whether, when it comes to private members' bills at Westminster, obviously they do a different statutory committees don't exist. We are kind of a hybrid of select committees and bill committees, and almost the kind of congressional style standing committees where you have standing. The select committees at Westminster obviously have a legislative role, but the bill committees, I presume it would be worth finding out whether Westminster standing orders allow for bill sponsors to be on those. I would imagine they don't, and probably they expressly preclude that happening for possibly quite obvious reasons. So that doesn't preclude what we're talking about here, having them as an ex officio member to aid with scrutiny, but we just need to be, like, for example, we ended up in a happenstance position where the bill committee had sponsor on it. It was more useful than not, but there were moments when the bill sponsor was in a position to guide scrutiny, and that's not a criticism of the bill sponsor or how we did it, because but there might be other situations in which it's not quite as desirable as we think, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, just thinking of our own example here when we were taking evidence on the defamation bill, and I think there was certain times, I think there was questions here amongst the committee members who were asking questions about what was the intent of the bill sponsor. Now that's when you would really get to the useful point where if you actually had the bill sponsor in the room, you could sort of.
Yeah, I mean, but there's also a question that will have to be considered by does someone who's coming to give evidence as a. We're slightly going down a rabbit hole here. It's not really our primary responsibility because we're not the Procedures Committee. But to an independent expert, an independent witness on a piece of legislation, is it entirely in order? Is it entirely desirable for them to be asked questions by the person who's sponsoring that bill, as if, for example, when a bill committee scrutinises legislation at legislation, say the legislation brought by a minister, and an independent expert, an academic, comes in to give evidence, the minister doesn't sit and get asked them questions. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think it needs to be thought through. I think there are merits to having the person in the room, but I would be perhaps slightly more cautious than others about some of the consequences.
Okay, thanks. Okay.
So I'll respond in those terms to the procedures. Is that agreed?
You got all that?
Yeah.
Agreed. Okay, moving on to the next, the composite request. Members asked to consider the composite request on page 128. Committee content with the composite request is an accurate and complete record. Are we agreed?
Agreed.
Right, thank you very much indeed. Moving on to the forward work programme. Draft forward work programme is page 147. Sorry, let's talk about just before that, we talk about the minister. They indicated December the
15th, the minister would be free, so hopefully, Chair, the draft budget would be, I would hope, available at that point. So that might be an opportune moment. Sorry, Mr. Wells.
Yeah, and also might be a useful point to note that we've had a note from the Fiscal Council. They are going to release a document next week that refers to the process. Not necessarily, it's not a detailed note on the actual sort of budget and the budget process and where we are. There's actually about sort of I understand it's a bit of a ready reckoner in Northern Ireland finances and how it's put together. And if you're content, committee, I'll arrange to meet the Fiscal Council just to discuss that. They've offered me a meeting on next Tuesday afternoon. If you're content for that.
The Chair.
Yeah, Jim.
A couple of points. First of all, in relation to my comment about Mr. Hugh, of course, it only applied to private members' bills. If Mr. McHugh tabled a motion saying that crows are black, I would table an amendment saying crows must be white. But I wanted to make it's just a principle of legislation.
Yeah, right, Chair. Could I just object to this ongoing sort of garbage that's actually coming from the member? I don't find it one bit funny. In fact, I find it insulting.
Sense of humour, then.
Gentlemen, through the chair and sort of quiet decorum. Jim,
well, there's always a humour bypass.
Yeah, please.
Moving on.
Please refer. And your second point.
The second. I've actually almost forgotten the second point because of that intervention. But could it say that the minister's now actually published the bill? It's in our pigeonholes. So therefore, there was no pigeonhole this morning.
Which bill?
The bill on the appeals for against.
Okay, sorry.
We haven't.
The budget bill.
The budget bill. Yeah.
And I know that he or somebody close to him watches every word that's said in this committee. So therefore, I'm giving him warning that he's definitely coming before us next week. Is that definite?
No, sorry. The minister's unavailable. So to be clear, the accelerated passage motion before plenary is next Tuesday.
Right. Yes.
So the minister is unable to come to us today because he's at an executive meeting,
which is still going on.
Can't escape. So he will not be here today. He won't be here next week. But I asked them for a date. I suggested the department 15th of December because we should have the budget by that stage. The minister will have quite a lot to talk about. But in terms of the rates valuations bill, I think the chair indicated that the committee would consider that next.
We have another item of
Yeah,
business on that.
I think it's very unfortunate then the Minister isn't before us today, because the question I was going to ask him, and I know he's listening, is what did he know and when did he know it? Why are we in this position? Why so late in the day are we being asked to do this? When did he become aware of the developing situation? Why did he not take action sooner? Now the problem is, there's not much sense asking him that on the 15th of December, because obviously we have to make a decision on Tuesday on the accelerated passage. I will be voting against accelerated passage. And I said at the last committee meeting, we need to come to a conclusion as a committee what we are going to do on Tuesday.
That's a substantive on the agenda, which is coming up after the forward work programmes, and we'll discuss that then. Okay. And we'll actually do that in closed session, so we can sort of discuss that in more detail. So, back to the draft forward work programme. The committee is. Are we content for the Minister to come on the 15th of December? Yes, agreed. Okay. The committee has received around 21 responses to the defamation bill call for evidence. Peter has issued a clause-by-clause build table on SharePoint, breaking down the submissions into possible amendments. In order to capture all of these, is the committee content to revise its work programme in order to include an extra briefing from Paul Gervin, Peter Gervin. So it's a Freudian slip there, if ever there was one. Peter Gervin, barrister, and the Law Society. Yeah, are we content? Yes. Yeah. And is the committee also content to substitute the briefing from Olivia O'Kane with one from Ulster Television? Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay. Are the members content with the forward work programme as amended?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. Move on to the next item of the agenda. As I said, this is to talk about the non-domestic rates valuation, and we'll take this in closed session if we are content.